If a high school student visits the school nurse for a headache 3 times in a single week, your first instinct is probably to give them a Tylenol and, a glass of water.
Which is completely understandable.
Right. But according to the data we are looking at today, you actually don't need to check their temperature. You need to check their screen time.
It's a huge paradigm shift.
It really is. So, welcome to today's deep dive. If you interact with teenagers in any capacity, whether you are a parent, an educator, or just a deeply invested aunt or uncle, you have likely witnessed this exhaustion.
Oh,
The slumped shoulders, the glazed look, and yet somehow their thumb is moving at warp speed on a glowing screen.
always.
Always. So today we are looking at a document called the MentalSpace Framework for Student Sleep and Digital Wellness, and our goal here is highly specific.
We want to keep it practical.
Exactly. We're pulling out 3 actionable K-12 strategies to solve this modern crisis. And the kicker is, none of these strategies require a school to, overhaul its entire curriculum.
Right, or hire a massive fleet of new staff.
Yes, which is the reality check we always need when talking about education, right? Because school resources are just perpetually stretched to their absolute limits.
They really are. But to really understand why these 3 specific strategies are so effective, we have to recognize what is actually happening on a biological level.
Right.
We aren't just dealing with a classroom management issue here. We are dealing with a systemic nervous system issue.
Okay, wow. A systemic nervous system issue.
Exactly. The modern adolescent environment is heavily dysregulating. So resolving this requires a coordinated biological response rather than just, telling kids to pay attention or put the phones away.
Yeah, just barking orders at them doesn't work. We are going to map out how this actually works in practice. We'll trace the life of a student starting at home. Then we'll walk through the universal school environment during the day. And finally, look at the clinical safety net for when a student hits a breaking point.
It's a really comprehensive through line.
It is. So let's start where the problem typically originates, which is the literal hours before that student attempts to sleep.
Right. Because if a school wants to improve focus at, say, 8 a.m., they have to address the root cause happening completely off campus the night before.
Yeah.
If a student's wind-down sequence is broken, any intervention the next morning is essentially useless.
Yeah.
We have to look at the mechanics of what happens when a teenager is scrolling on their phone for 4 or more hours a night.
Which is incredibly common now.
Oh, it's the norm.
And the data on that is genuinely startling. I mean, that level of prolonged scrolling functionally rewires a child's brain. It completely alters how the brain signals that it's time to sleep.
It really does.
And typically, the advice given to parents is just a generic limit screen time.
Right, which isn't helpful.
Not at all. Okay, let's unpack this. Telling a parent to just limit screen time is like telling someone to drive safely without explaining what a brake pedal is.
That is a great way to put it.
It's vague. And quite frankly, it doesn't give the parent the tools to understand what they're actually fighting against.
It fails completely because it doesn't address the underlying biology. When a student is scrolling through short-form videos late at night, they are experiencing 2 things simultaneously.
Okay.
First, the blue light exposure is actively suppressing the brain's natural melatonin production.
Right, the sleep hormone.
Exactly. And second, and perhaps more importantly, the continuous stream of microdopamine hits keeps the sympathetic nervous system, so the body's fight-or-flight response completely engaged.
Wow.
Evolutionarily, our brains interpret that rapid influx of novel information as a threat, or at least an urgency signal that requires wakefulness.
So it's basically like an engine stuck in the red zone, completely decoupled from the fuel gauge. Like the body is exhausted out of gas, but the brain is still revving at maximum RPMs.
Precisely. And this is why a parent might take the phone away at 9:50 p.m., tell the kid to be asleep by 10:00 p.m., and then wonder why the child is staring at the ceiling an hour later.
Because the engine is still revving.
Right. The nervous system hasn't been given the runway to power down. So the first actionable step from this framework is arming parents with this specific neurological data.
Okay.
Parents need to see the hard numbers connecting screen time to sleep architecture, attention spans, and baseline mood the following day.
But practically speaking, how does a school actually deliver that hard data without sounding like they're just, lecturing the parents?
Yeah, tone is important.
Right. The approach we're looking at here suggests an incredibly low-lift method. Instead of some massive, expensive campaign, it's a simple, clear, data-heavy handout included right in the back-to-school packet.
So straightforward.
You just put the sleep, attention, and mood statistics right there on the paper.
Hmm.
Let the data do the heavy lifting. Then pair that with just one annual parent night dedicated specifically to adolescent sleep and digital wellness.
And from an administrative standpoint, that is a highly efficient use of resources.
Yeah.
One clear document and one dedicated night.
Yeah, that's totally manageable.
But to ensure that message doesn't just fade away by October, school counselors are provided with specific, unified scripts.
Scripts for the counselors.
Yes.
Yeah.
If a student starts falling asleep in class and the counselor has to call home, they aren't just winging it. They are using data-driven language that echoes exactly what was in that back-to-school packet.
Creating a consistent loop of information.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. It removes the burden from the individual teacher or counselor who might feel awkward bringing it up, and it makes the conversation purely about the health data.
Yes, it neutralizes it.
Okay, so let's say a school gets the parents on board, they understand the neurology, and the student actually manages to get some decent sleep. But the second that kid walks through the school doors the next morning, they are hit with a wall of social dynamics, academic pressure, and buzzing pockets.
It's a very intense environment.
So how does a school prevent their nervous system from immediately spiking right back into that red zone?
That is the pivotal transition point, because the school day itself is an environment that will either help regulate or further dysregulate a student.
Which introduces the second major strategy from the framework, building phone-free quiet time directly into the school day.
Yes.
Now, wait, hold on. I have to play devil's advocate here because here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, go for it.
If you look a group of 15-year-olds in the eye and announce, all right, everyone, it's phone-free quiet time, they aren't going to be grateful.
Not at all.
They're going to see it as a punishment or some sort of forced kindergarten nap time. How does a middle or high school successfully pull this off without sparking an outright classroom rebellion?
It's the #1 concern for any principal looking at this model. And the answer lies entirely in the framing.
The framing, okay.
This cannot be presented as a disciplinary measure.
Yeah.
If the message is, you are all addicted to your screens, so we are confiscating them, you will absolutely get resistance.
Oh, for sure. Defenses go right up.
Exactly. It has to be framed, normalized, and taught as a biological necessity. It is nervous system regulation. And what the data shows is that introducing just 15 minutes of this phone-free quiet time, perhaps right after lunch, it yields massive, tangible improvements in behavior and attention over the course of a single semester.
Just 15 minutes. I mean, out of a 7-hour school day, that feels like a drop in the bucket. How is such a brief window moving the needle so dramatically on something as complex as teenage behavior?
It's because of what is happening physiologically when we force that break. Throughout the morning, teenagers are existing in a state of continuous partial attention.
Continuous partial attention.
Yes. They're trying to listen to a math lecture while simultaneously anticipating a text message, worrying about a social media post, and tracking the social dynamics of the classroom.
Wow.
The brain's threat detection system is constantly pinging.
Which has to be incredibly calorically expensive for the brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It completely drains their cognitive reserves.
Yeah.
But by enforcing just 15 minutes where the phone is physically separated from the student, you force the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest system, to finally activate.
Okay, so you're actually changing their biology midday.
Right. You're universally lowering cortisol levels across the entire student body before they head into their afternoon classes. If you compound that daily reset over a 90-day semester, you fundamentally lower the baseline stress level of the entire building.
That is wild. So what does that actually look like for the teacher in the room? Like, do the lights go off? Are they sleeping?
It varies, but the key is low cognitive load. It might be silent reading, journaling, or simply putting their heads down.
Just pausing.
Yes. Some districts are highly strategic with this, utilizing these 15-minute reset blocks right before major exams to drastically lower test anxiety. Others build it seamlessly into existing homeroom or advisory periods.
That's smart.
But the non-negotiable factor here is the phone storage policy. Phones face down on the desk does not work.
It doesn't.
No. If the device is in their peripheral vision or vibrating in their pocket, The brain is still allocating resources to it.
Hmm.
It has to be true physical separation, like a designated wall pouch, so the brain can actually stand down.
Out of sight, out of mind, the most literal biological sense.
Exactly.
Okay, so we have the parent education happening at home, and we have these daily 15-minute nervous system resets happening at school.
Right.
But we are still dealing with human beings. The reality is, even with those proactive measures, some students are carrying heavier loads. Some nervous systems are simply too overloaded and they will still crash.
That's inevitable.
So how does the school identify the students who are quietly falling through the cracks and need more help than just, a quiet reading period?
That is where we have to look for the physical indicators of system failure. And this leads us to the third core strategy, establishing a clear referral pathway when sleep and stress complaints become chronic.
And this is where that fascinating metric from the very beginning comes back into play. The data points out a highly specific clinical signal. When a student visits the school nurse for headaches or fatigue 3 times in a rolling week.
Right. And we need to understand what those visits actually represent. We are talking about somatic symptoms.
Somatic symptoms.
Yes. Somatic basically means when psychological stress like profound anxiety or digital exhaustion manifests as actual physical pain in the body. The brain is so overwhelmed that it translates the distress into a literal migraine or a stomach ache or clinical fatigue.
So what does this all mean for the school nurse? It completely reframes their role. If a student is showing up 3 times a week with a headache, the instinct is often to assume they are just trying to skip a difficult math test or that they are just being lazy.
Which is an easy trap to fall into.
Right. But this data says no, the body keeps the score. These aren't kids trying to avoid schoolwork. They are showing somatic symptoms of a nervous system that is tapped out.
And this trigger criteria, 3 nurse visits in a rolling week, is brilliant because it removes the guesswork.
How so?
It takes the subjective judgment away from a teacher who might misinterpret the behavior. Once a student crosses that documented threshold, the protocol shifts. A disciplinary conversation about paying attention in class is no longer appropriate.
Okay.
The required next step is an assessment with a clinician trained in adolescent mental health and sleep.
But here is the friction point. Getting a parent to agree to a psychological assessment for their child can be incredibly delicate.
Very delicate.
There is often a lot of stigma, denial, or just defensiveness. If a school calls up a parent and says, "We think your kid needs therapy," that conversation is going to shut down immediately.
Which is why the implementation strategy relies heavily on pre-built referral language. It lowers what we call the activation cost.
Wait, activation costs meaning the emotional and mental energy a parent has to expend to agree to the process.
Exactly. When the counselor makes that phone call, they aren't diagnosing a mental health crisis. They're relying on the health data.
Right.
The script sounds more like, our clinical records show your child has visited the nurse 3 times this week for somatic symptoms related to severe fatigue. Our standard health protocol for this is to offer a specialized wellness assessment.
Ah. By anchoring the conversation in documented physical symptoms and standard school protocol, it drastically lowers the parent's defensiveness.
Exactly. It normalizes the assessment as a routine health check rather than a crisis intervention.
That is a masterclass in communication. But it brings us to a massive logistical hurdle. Let's say the school does everything right.
Yeah.
The nurse logs the 3 visits, the counselor uses the perfect script, and the parent agrees to the assessment. But who is actually doing it? If a school doesn't have the budget to hire a fleet of new therapists, what happens? You can't just hand a struggling family a phone number for a local private practice that has a 6-month waiting list.
No, you can't.
6 months in the life of a teenager in crisis is an eternity.
And you've just identified the exact execution gap where most well-intentioned school initiatives fall apart. Schools can host the parent nights, they can enforce the quiet times, but when a severe case arises, they lack the clinical infrastructure to handle it. This third layer, a reliable clinical safety net, is what is missing.
And this is exactly where the source material gets very specific about how to bridge that gap, using a model designed for K-12 schools, specifically highlighting a partner service called MentalSpace School.
Yes, MentalSpace.
Now, looking at the national landscape, we are seeing a broader trend where state legislatures are starting to legally mandate that schools provide better mental health infrastructure.
Yes. For example, in Georgia, they passed legislation known as HB 268, which places strict requirements on schools to have functional mental health protocols in place by a looming 2026 deadline.
That's a lot of pressure. It's a heavy burden for districts. They are being told to provide comprehensive care, but they aren't necessarily given the massive budgets required to hire full-time in-house clinical teams to meet those mandates. So a partnership model becomes the blueprint for how schools can actually survive these new laws.
So let's walk through the actual mechanism of how this works,
All
because
right.
understanding the timeline is what makes it so impactful. Imagine the logistics of a typical school day.
Okay.
At 10 a.m., a student visits the nurse with their third debilitating headache of the week. The nurse logs it. By 10:90 a.m., the school counselor is on the phone with the parent using that pre-built script, and the parent gives consent.
Right.
With a partnership model like MentalSpace, by 1:00 p.m. that exact same day, that student can be sitting in a quiet, designated room at school on a secure tablet, having a teletherapy assessment with a diverse, culturally competent, licensed therapist.
Same-day intervention. That is the critical factor. You are catching the student at the exact moment of need, entirely bypassing the 6-month wait list.
Which is massive. And because the therapy teams are dedicated to specific schools, the school counselors are collaborating with the same familiar clinicians week after week. It creates a seamless extension of the school's existing staff. It also includes crisis intervention, suicide and violence prevention, and even staff wellness and family counseling.
And the most vital part of this mechanism is how it's funded. Because if the school isn't stretching its budget to pay for these individual sessions, and we don't want the parents paying massive out-of-pocket fees, how is it clinically sustainable?
It works by integrating directly with the existing healthcare system. Services like this are built to be barrier-free for the families. They bill Medicaid directly, which often means $0 out of pocket for those students.
$0.
Wow. Yes. And for families with private health insurance, they are in-network with a massive list of providers: BCBS, Cigna, Aetna, UHC, Humana, Peach State, CareSource, AmeriGroup.
Basically everyone.
Right. So the financial burden is removed from both the school district's operating budget and the family's checking account.
So you have removed the two highest walls blocking adolescent care: the agonizing wait times and the prohibitive cost. And when you actually put this full machine into motion, the outcome data is hard to argue with.
The numbers are incredible.
They really are. By utilizing this comprehensive three-tier approach, schools are seeing an 89% improvement in attendance for these flagged students. They are seeing a 92% reduction in reported anxiety and an 85% satisfaction rate from the families involved.
It's undeniable.
Think about that narrative arc. You have a teenager whose brain was essentially rewired by late-night scrolling, showing up to school physically ill from exhaustion, and within a semester, their attendance is up 89% because their nervous system is finally being regulated.
It is a profound testament to what happens when you stop treating the behavioral symptoms like lack of focus or skipping class and start treating the root biological cause. If we synthesize these three pillars, you see how they interlock. First, you have the data-driven parent education targeting the off-campus wind-down sequence. Second, you have the universal 15-minute phone-free resets regulating the nervous system during the school day.
Right?
And third, you have a data-triggered referral pathway connecting students to a partner clinical team for immediate, barrier-free teletherapy.
And if you remove any one of those pillars, the whole thing gets shaky.
Precisely. If you only build a referral pathway but skip the daily school resets, your clinical team will be completely overwhelmed by students who really just needed a basic biological break.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Conversely, if you only educate parents but have no clinical safety net, your most severe, chronic cases are left stranded. But when synchronized, they work exponentially better together, completely bypassing the need for a school to double its internal headcount.
It is an exercise in working smarter, not harder. And for you listening right now, whether you are an educator trying to manage a chaotic classroom, a parent navigating the smartphone battles in your own home, or you're just fascinated by the intersection of technology and psychology, this framework proves something deeply encouraging.
It really does.
Systemic burnout does not require a systemic teardown. You do not have to rebuild the entire educational system from scratch. You just need smart coordination and understanding of the root cause and the ability to recognize when a human system is biologically overloaded.
Absolutely.
We started today by picturing that exhausted teenager trapped in a cycle that feels impossible to break, but this data provides a clear path forward that treats them as a human being rather than just, a discipline problem.
It certainly does. And while this framework is explicitly designed for K-12 environments, it leaves us with a highly relevant, kind of provocative question to ponder on our own.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Well, if a simple 15-minute nervous system reset and a proper sleep assessment can drastically reduce teenage anxiety and absenteeism. What does that say about how adults manage our own digital exhaustion during the workday?
Oh, wow.
Are we constantly punishing ourselves for a lack of focus when biologically our bodies are just desperately asking for a reset?